So, hello and a very warm welcome on this sunny Saturday afternoon to the last day of our industry talks of Vienna Shorts this year. I am very happy to be able to have the chance to talk to my two guests here today. my two guests, I will introduce in a second. Maybe just as a starting point, the whole talk is called solidarity, or is around the question of solidarity and how to show it in a setup of a film, in the context of a film, and it has a starting point, which is a film program that we curated for this year's festival edition, but also for this year's edition of This Is Short, a platform that we're running together with 3 other festivals from Europe, the Kurzfilmtage Oberhausen, Go Short Festival from Nijmegen, and Shortwaves Festival in Poznan. And together, each festival delivered one perspective, as we called it, on the topic of solidarity. This talk is also now part of this whole theme and framework. Vienna chose the perspective of speaking of solidarity in the context of deportation and rights, human rights. I have to say there was 2 starting points for this program. One was, as especially viewers from Austria might be familiar with, there was the deportation of Viennese schoolgirls in January, late January, beginning of February, which caused quite an uproar in Austria. And the big question was discussed in the media, like why are children, if some of them even born in the country, are allowed to be deported in the middle of the night? And if the law allows this, if it is really a good law. I think this is the big question that is broadly discussed. And on the other hand, I found a quote from the EU Commissioner, Ylva Johansson, who said basically about the new European migrant policy, migration pact, that those who have no rights should go home. This is basically how she summarized it. So coming from these 2 starting points, we collected 5 films that we thought are dealing with the topic of deportation in a very special way, a very unique way, I also think. And what we try with this talk now is to, on the one hand, talk about the films, especially one film in particular, and we will also try to figure out the context of filmmaking, human rights filmmaking, activism, which is why we also brought in and basically in-house, not really in-house, but a Viennese festival organizer from the Human Rights Film Festival, This Human World. So let me introduce my 2 guests briefly. I'm very happy that both of you took the time. Andreas Løppenthin, do I say that right? Yes.
Yeah, sounds good.
You made the film I Am Only Present, which was one of the films that we could see yesterday also at the screening on Karmelitermarkt at the open air screening. You are from Copenhagen, from Denmark. You call yourself a visual sociologist. And you're exploring the intersection, as I saw on your website, intersection between social research, theory, and visual narratives. I think we will go into this very quickly a bit more, because I'm very curious about also how your work, how you approach your work. But first, my second guest, also let me introduce Lisa Heuschober. She's one of the 2 festival directors of This Human World, and with a background in anthropology, and very happy that that you joined us for this conversation as well.
I'm happy to be here today as well.
Yeah, we were supposed to also have a third panelist here, Rikke Gregersen from The Affected. She could unfortunately not join us because she's shooting a film or a TV series now on the weekend. Nevertheless, I think we have plenty of things to talk about in the context of this program and in the context of solidarity, and especially with a focus on deportation. And I think let's start, Andreas, with your film, and also maybe with an excerpt of your film, just to also remind people again what it was about, how it looked like, and maybe you can tell a bit how it came about, just to start with.
Mm-hmm. 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 Okay. Do you want to start with the excerpt, or should I present it?
As you prefer. As you prefer.
Well, I can just maybe also briefly say thank you very much for inviting me to take part in this talk, and also to participate in the program with the Vienna shorts and This Is Shorts. I'm very glad that the film I've made sort of gets an opportunity to have this life sort of with you and with this festival, and gets an opportunity to get out with some people that might not have seen it. Yeah, so the film is kind of like a visual essay or visual exploration of an area outside Gatwick Airport in London, where they in sort of on the back side of the airport there is an industrial estate. There's an area with different warehouses and buildings, and one of the buildings that are kept there is what they in the UK call an immigration removal center, which is basically a detention center where people are kept while their asylum proceedings or immigration proceedings are taking place. And they often end up staying there for a very long time. And what especially characterizes it is that people never know how long they will stay there. It's sort of an indefinite stay because it's only sort of known within the deep halls of this bureaucracy how long the case will take to be considered. So that's just a very sort of quick early framing of like the theme of the film, and then maybe we can watch the short excerpt, and then we can talk more about it and also the form of it after that.
Mm-hmm.
You get off in a roundabout. The cars are swishing by. You run across the road when there's a gap in the traffic, and you spot me on the other side of a meadow. You don't want to disturb the cows, so you walk down the road instead. Past Monica's Burger Bar and into the industrial estate. You pass my neighbors, Acro Aircraft Seating, RS Components, World Duty Free Distribution Center, Gate Gourmet. They produce things, store them, process them. So do I. We're all in that business around here. Storing, producing, processing, food, chocolate, furniture, humans. I'm a building. Brook House Immigration Removal Center is my name. I don't normally have a voice, but I borrowed one for now.
So you borrow the voice of a house. Just to maybe start with this, also the perspective that you take. How did you come up with it, and how how did you choose this perspective also?
Yeah, well, I guess maybe I'll have to start then with thinking about sort of how I wanted to go about this exploration, right? Because as sort of the theme of this talk today, and also your topic for the festival, I was interested in exploring sort of this topic of immigration detention systems, or basically these systems where people are restricted in their mobility in certain ways because of the way they move, basically, because of the way they try to be mobile around the world, and because of their documents, basically. So I was interested in finding a way where I could explore this sort of systemic topic, and especially the materiality of this topic as systemic. So I quite early on knew that I wanted to do something about this infrastructure, these buildings, basically, and the role that are played by the infrastructure and the buildings in this system of deportation and detainment. And part of that was also sort of a concern for me of trying to think about how do we, as filmmakers or as people addressing topics like this, how do we go about these talking about people in a very vulnerable situation, right? So there's a lot of work done, which I think is important work also, which focuses on people in detention. And I think it's very important to get these stories out and to have people tell these stories. But sometimes I can also be wary of if we have too many of these, there can also be this kind of spectacle of the victim, in a sense. Mm. So in order to try something different, I thought, okay, I'm interested in the infrastructure, in the buildings, and I'm kind of wary of this sort of the spectacle of sort of objectifying a victim as someone in this just very tragic situation. So I thought, what if we instead of taking the power to give voice to a person, what if we give it to this physical structure? And it turned out for me to be a quite good way, I think, for me to unfold kind of the research that was behind this film for me. Because I spent a lot of time researching what was going on with this area. I sort of had a lot of knowledge about this building. So it turned out as I feel a way where I could sort of write down this knowledge and get it out without just being me doing a talk. Mm-hmm.
And was it clear for you from the beginning that it should turn into a film, because it also works like as a written essay in a very poetic manner sometimes even?
Yeah, it was clear for me that it was supposed to be connected to moving images. But actually, it was originally developed as part of a larger installation where I had several moving images. And what is now the film that you have seen an excerpt from now was sort of the main feature of this installation. But I had also images of sort of documents that were being shown, some of the documents essential for the bureaucracy running this place, and also some maps of the area. But yeah, to answer your question, I knew that I wanted to connect this to moving images.
Now, just maybe also to include Lisa at this stage right away, because I found an interview with you where you say that it's, especially with human rights topics, it's very important also to have kind of emotions connected with the films, or that emotions always play a certain role also. What you try, Andreas, is, or especially with the voiceover, that you take out the emotional part completely. So I would just be curious of your perspective, and both of your perspectives, actually.
Yeah. No, I think what you just said, that you just made some very important points, which I really like the way you expressed it. Because as you say, like it's a thin line, these emotions, you want them to be truthful, and you want to portray emotions and voices that are silenced or sometimes have no opportunity to be heard. But I think you said it, the spectacle of the victim. I think this is the words you used. That's something that needs to be avoided a lot, especially if we talk about vulnerable persons. And I think sometimes, actually in way too many cases, there's this almost voyeurism when it comes to vulnerable persons or groups, and then especially also when in times when there are a lot of headlines on topics like migration, there's this idea that it needs to be very emotional, and that we want to see them how they live their, maybe go through very hard situations, which then can be even entertaining. It's document, this is the problem in a lot of cases. So I find it very, very interesting and very important that you said that it's important to remove that and not to portray those people in a way that it's a kind of a spectacle. And I find it a really, really nice approach, and very interesting to then decide to draw back on the infrastructure and on the buildings and the system that produces those vulnerable groups, which sometimes it's even more important to raise awareness for that. And which I also find very important, that you said you do not want to, I think you said you don't want to give those people a voice, but you give it to the house then, because sometimes it's also so problematic, because it's so easy then to talk for persons. And then it's also the question, who is talking now and whose narrative is it and whose story is it? So I really actually liked what you just said. And I think, Daniel, what you said about the emotions, I think it's important to open spaces and not talk for persons, and to really avoid those ideas of or those voyeuristic views and spectacles.
I was wondering, Andreas, if you had the idea also maybe to go and talk to people and do interviews and include basically the perspectives not only of the building, but of those in those buildings as well. Or was it for you clear from the beginning also that you say exactly what Lisa just mentioned, that is also difficult if you give take over different voices or other voices?
No, I mean it wasn't completely clear for me from the beginning that I didn't want to that I wanted to focus only on the voice of the infrastructure and the voice of the building. I did consider that I was considering should I talk to some people in here. It turned out that it was very difficult. I couldn't get access to this place. It's run by the security company G4S, and they have a very strict policy about who gets to get in there. I did talk to a person that comes as a visitor and talks to people in there. So I had these secondhand accounts of what it was like to be in there. And I also read accounts of people who had been in this place. So these things were sort of part of my research, part of my background for trying to understand what kind of place this is and what kind of situation the people that are in there are in. But what I was also, I mean, a large reason for focusing on the building perspective was that I was quite weary of going into this, taking this role as someone that has the power to give someone voice, right? Because on the one hand, it's I think it's very important that when you are in a position where you make a film and you get to go to a festival with it or something, that you use that power to sort of to give voice to someone that are not usually able to use this voice. But on the other hand, I was also, when making the film, I didn't know where this was going. I was just doing this on my own, and I felt weary of like going in and I was and essentially appropriating someone's very tragic life story for my film. So this is why I sort of went along with this sort of building perspective, or part of the reason. But I mean, I've also been in doubt of this reasoning since, and I mean, it was a pleasure to watch the other films in the program, especially now I'm thinking of Alle Liebe and Undocumented Lawyer, which are films that are very different from my films in almost every aspect, except for theming maybe. But I think what those two films do quite nicely is that they center a person that is both in a vulnerable position, but also in a very strong position. And they clearly give voice to this person, but also show how that can be done without doing sort of victim spectacle, which I think was very nice to see. And I'm glad that our films are sort of coupled in your program in that sense.
I'm very happy that you mentioned that, because of course, while doing research, it was very interesting that first of all, I didn't come across any Austrian film that would have dealt with this topic, although it was kind of, as I said in the beginning, it was the starting point also for us why we wanted to discuss it. And I was very curious to see if there is films, and did a lot of research, and especially because we often hear of those news stories also that villages or people in villages suddenly show solidarity with people who are about to be deported, and I thought it's such a good film topic also, or such a good way of also discussing deportation, or especially human rights in a bigger sense. And I was a bit shocked that there was nothing there. And then I, by doing more research, I found kind of these two strands in a way. The one strand where it's a very essayistic approach, which I think works extremely well with your film, and it's very unique what you do by giving this giving your voice to a building and not to the people, or what is kind of the maybe more American way of handling it, by putting a person in the center of a documentary, and especially with the undocumented lawyer, the last film in the program, it also apparently spoke to a lot of people, and is now developed into a TV series also with this person, like an HBO series, with this person in center stage. So yeah, I was curious. Maybe this is also now going to Lisa now a bit, because it is such a highly problematized topic, or highly discussed topic, and I was just also wondering how, if you come across films in your work as a festival organizer and curator, that deal with it, and if you made maybe also different experiences when you do your research in this field.
Yeah, I mean, I come across a lot of films that deal with the super broad topic of migration, and of course also a lot on the migration towards the European Union, and also within the European Union. And of course, it's important for us to include it. I mean, we consider ourselves as a platform and network for human rights, or human rights interested and related people, but also for the people that we try to maybe kind of that are the protagonists of our films. So of course, it's then always important, especially within the last years, to include those films in our festival. So we do a lot of research and try to find a lot of films on the and also on the topic of deportation, of course. And sometimes, just to draw back on what you just said, Daniel, sometimes it takes a while for the films to then appear. So because sometimes, of course, you wanted a film on that topic right now because it's so urgent, it is currently in the news, but then you have to wait for another year until the film has finished. So maybe next year you will be able to find a film, an Austrian film about what happened in winter, but let's see. But of course, then we find so many films that deal with the topics of migration and deportation, and I feel that some of them are very let's say respectful, and think a lot about how to portray those people's lives, and how to give them space to talk and to explain and to let us know what they live through, or what their story is. But sometimes I have to feel that in a lot of cases, I feel the films have a different perspective, that there is a kind of a spectacle, and that they that they sometimes even put this hero of the volunteer into the center of the film. This happens a lot of times, that the center of the film and the center of the attention is actually the European volunteer who helps the people in Europe, or the NGO person, or the politician of a small party who is wants to create an more open open borders, like and those are the films that we actually do not want to include in our festival, because that's not what it is about. We feel that it's about the people who migrate, the people who have to face challenges when coming to Europe and being in Europe and being when having to migrate, so I have the feeling that it's a lot of work to find those very respectful films. Like as I said, Andreas, I really like what you just said about your work and your film, and it's a lot of work to find those and to research. But it's important to include them always from our perspective for our platform. But sometimes, as I just said, it's hard to then find the film that you want, because it takes a while to produce them, because they have to make, it takes a while to think them through, to make a concept, and then to take time to edit, because I feel it deserves this time. So we have to be patient sometimes to get the films that we want, or the protagonists we want to be seen.
Maybe that's also a good question. How long did it take you, Andreas, to kind of turn this whole idea and concept into the film then that we have now on screen?
I think it was a span over a year or something like this, from the first initial thoughts of this being something that I wanted to research, and then for having the final product, or how to say. And it was a lot of going back and forth also. And I also spent a lot of time researching before actually doing any film work, right? And I think this is also, as you mentioned in the beginning, Daniel, I have called myself visual sociologist, so I have a background in sociology that has a very sort of strict and strong academic tradition of how you research things, right? So this is, I have been sort of schooled in this in many ways, and I guess I'm interested in this sort of research way of researching, and also especially sort of the theoretical fueling, which I think is also, I hope is, at least was obvious to me when I was making my film, that there was a big sort of theoretical backdrop in thinking about it. But anyway, it also bores me a lot, this sort of the typical academic sociological approach, the research approach, especially the way it ends up in sort of long reports or long texts that are, where you have to, there's this specific language, academic language, that's not that it's complex. That's not the issue for me. It's more that you often feel like you need to cover every angle, and you need to have described everything in very precise detail. Where what I wanted to try with this film is, how can we make something where we fold this research, fold this sociological research into something that has a different expression than the typical research article or research essay, right? So I wanted to fold it into something that was not only where everything was not written into detail. And I guess you're right. Both of you were mentioning that my film kind of takes some emotion out of this topic, and I think you're right in the sense that it does that. In the sense that there is not a face or a voice of victims for this system. But I still feel that I try to play a lot with. Maybe not the emotional, but sort of the affective of creating sort of a certain affect or atmosphere when watching this movie, where there's a lot of information in it, a lot of words are said, but I feel like there's also an atmosphere that I wanted to play at, and especially by coupling this kind of complex text or voiceover with very sort of mundane, kind of normal images of just a kind of grey industrial estate in the UK, where it looks the cows on the field looks very normal and unspectacular. I don't know if that makes sense. I got a little lost on the way.
No. I think it's actually a good point that I would also be curious in, because of course we mentioned also like in the text about the program that there is always kind of the automatic answer that you always get, yeah, but this is the law and this is how it is. So in a way, of course, by not portraying like every side, as you say, like you would do in the academic or more academic approach. You take would you consider your approach more like an activist, like an activism or activistic approach? You say the activist approach?
Yeah, in some ways, I hope that I would do that. Because I hope that it would sort of encourage kind of an affective or an emotional reaction that is like, oh, this is a bad system. This should not be in this way. So in that sense, there is definitely an activist agenda in me in making this film, and not, how can I put it, just sort of uncovering something as an academic approach would be. But then on the other hand, I also, especially in the context of the films that we were talking about before, I hesitate a little bit with claiming sort of the word activist film with this film, because the two films that we were talking about before, Undocumented Lawyer and Alle Libre, I see as activist in a much more direct way, where they are showing activists doing work, and they are drawing attention, they are in a way helping these activists do their work by drawing attention to their campaigns. And they also end their films with links to where you can, if you watch the movie, then you can go to this website and you can actively participate in this struggle, right? Where, yeah, my film is more distant.
Lisa, would you say that this is often like a starting point for filmmakers, that there is kind of an activist agenda also there, especially when it's about human rights issues?
Yeah, I think it's a topic that comes up a lot, the idea of what is an activist, or what is activist filmmaking, what is like people ask us, are we an activist film festival? Because the term of activism is so strongly connected to human rights, and for good reasons, or unfortunately for reasons we all know why, because they have to be fought for. But I think filmmakers really see this very differently. It really depends. I think sometimes it's hard for them to claim the idea of activism, because they see themselves just as a space opener, as somebody who is portraying as a maybe kind of connected to journalism, somebody who is and I think sometimes like maybe filmmakers who are interested in this activist agenda are drawn to activists. There are so many films that debate activism or activists, but I think there are so many different ideas of what is activism that I cannot talk about it in general. But I feel that some filmmakers definitely see themselves as activists, and I think some people see our festival as an activist film festival, which I would never claim. I feel that as an space and a platform, we cannot necessarily say that we are an activist film festival, not at all. But we definitely want our festival to be enriched by activism and by people who are engaging with activism, and by activist filmmakers, of course. But I think it's hard to define or to find a definition for that. Yeah, but I mean, definitely, I'd say a political agenda. But I mean, what is political? What is a political agenda? But I mean, maybe this is something that more relate to than necessarily the term of activism.
Speaking of activism, of course, you always have also, or political agenda, you always have the people in mind who should watch that film, and who should have ideally a complete change of mind in how to deal with an issue, with a topic. Did you have any reactions, Andreas, on your film? Did you also maybe not only like positive or negative, but also maybe indeed, like, did discussions come up? Because I think it opens up a lot of space for discussions.
Well, I haven't sort of had like it has opened up space for discussion, definitely, but not in a sort of how can I put it, controversial way, and more like along people thinking along with the film, right? And maybe, as you say, Lisa, opening up spaces for reflection on this topic, right? And it could also depend on who the film sort of has reached. I mean, there might be people who see it and disagree strongly with some of the sentiments that it puts out there that might enact a different kind of discussion. But yeah, I wouldn't say that I have sort of that I have received sort of reactions that were challenging the film's way of portraying this situation. And I mean, it would be interesting to me. I would love to have that discussion. It's not that, but I guess the people that have been that it has reached has been following the sentiment. And maybe that's also a problem with this kind of film, because it's maybe also, when you were talking before, Daniel, about, you have an idea of what your audience is. And I was thinking, I actually didn't really have an idea of my audience when I made it. But maybe I did. I mean, there is something about this film that speaks a lot to someone who might agree with me or think in the same way as me. And from an activist point of view, that is maybe a problem, because then whose mind does it change minds? I don't know. Maybe it makes someone aware of something that they were already thinking, or think further about it. But I think that's also why I wouldn't say that it's an activist piece of work in that sense. Here, I think it's important also involve yourself in. If you want to call yourself an activist, then to involve yourself in actual activist work, being protests or helping out people that are in these detention centers. And there are various different ways of doing this through a lot of, at least what I know of in Denmark, good organizations and a lot of very good people that are doing very important activist work.
I mean, I think this is the most difficult thing for everybody, to kind of get out of your bubble with what you do, to reach people that are not only those who are on the same page in a way anyway. I think this is also maybe something, Lisa, where you can relate to, because I think one of the main things, also what you said for a festival, is of course to give a space for discussions and open up a space for discussion, and ideally it's not only the one-sided discussion where everyone is on the same page anyway, but where there might also be some controversy. How difficult is that for you also?
I think that's a super important question that we think about always when organizing our festival, the idea of diverse target groups or a diverse audience. And it's actually really, difficult. It requires a lot of effort to create a diverse audience, because of course there's a certain audience that goes to the cinema, there's a certain audience that's interested in film, there's a certain audience that has the privilege of being able to do activist or unpaid work in the field of human rights, and there's a certain group of people who is privileged enough to engage with like studies in social sciences, who like this is normally our group that like the audience that comes to the cinema. But I think it's really important to make the effort to get a more diverse audience, and I don't think that we necessarily aim for confrontational discussions. I think I would actually really like that. I think it would be really enriching also to have discussions where we don't always nod and agree with each other, but that which doesn't happen too often, if I'm honest. But what happens often is that there are a lot of different perspectives on the same topic find themselves in the same room, and this is very fruitful, and this is something that we really aim for, because I think we can manage this by not only being in the cinemas that are like in the 7th district in Vienna, which is a very hip young area, for instance, but going to maybe the districts where not the typical cinema audience lives, because you have to go where people live if you want to reach them. And so I think it's sometimes really, really important to think about how to really create and like actively create a diverse audience, which I think we can do because of a lot of cooperation partners, for instance, and because of a lot of different groups and also communities that we work with, a lot of different festivals, community festivals, to create a diverse audience. But I think it's something you always have to work on. It just does not happen like this, because because cinema is just way too exclusive, if we are honestly talking.
But did you think that this has maybe also changed a bit with the like now in the past 1.5 years or 14 months with the pandemic, and being able to maybe also reach not only local audience in a way in the cinema, but also being able to reach a more global audience? Or is this idea of reaching a global audience just a beautiful dream? And how would you reach them anyway? Because you need, you're not Netflix or anything.
Yeah. But I mean, I think it's not, I mean, of course it's a dream, but I would not necessarily say it's an unrealistic dream. I mean, but what you are doing, you are creating international film festival networks. And I think this is actually a really good way to maybe create a global audience or a international audience. I mean, we only streamed Austrian wide, so we unfortunately didn't have the opportunity to reach like outside the Austrian borders, but we like crossed the Viennese borders, which is also actually something that we've been hoping for a long time, because then now we talk about cinemas are so exclusive, but I mean, it's also the fact that in a country like Austria, where there's like one big capital, of course, everything is so centered there that it's sometimes so hard to reach people that are not in Vienna, and it's so hard to and it's also something about diversity, that you can only reach people who are living in a big city, but you actually want to reach people who are living on the countryside and people who are living maybe also very different realities from what you know and what you live. So I think this is something that was actually one of the big plus points. I mean, there were a lot of obstacles and things I would have liked to be different last year, but it was really cool to have also feedback from an Austrian-wide audience. And I don't know, my mom's family in Styria was part of the festival for the first time ever, because they wouldn't just come to Vienna to be in a cinema, but then suddenly I was talking to my grandma, who's like 87 years old, who said like, I don't speak English, and maybe next time more German-speaking films. And I said, yeah, true. We learn and learn and learn, be less exclusive. And you only learn being less exclusive and being in contact with a diverse audience. So I think that definitely was enriching.
We also showed just as an information for you, Andreas, because you might not even know that, but we showed the screening your film yesterday with German subtitles, because we also knew we would be at a place where there's also a lot of audience coming just from the local area, and they might also not be familiar with listening to English in a longer way. I really like what you say, Lisa. I think one film maybe in the program also that shows quite well these very different perspectives that there are is the first film, The Affected, by Rike Gregersen. Unfortunately, as I said, she cannot be here, but I would at least still like to bring the film in because we chose it as a starting point, because it also shows on the one hand the indifference of many people, on the other hand the many different angles that you can have from being it the company's point of view, being it the people interacting directly with the protagonists, being the bystanders that sometimes start to engage and sometimes don't care at all, but in the end might still get up and applaud when everyone is applauding. And still, she's showing also that in the end it didn't change much, maybe for the person that was affected. Because the next flight for the saved person was 2 hours later. So I think it was kind of this starting point that we thought it's a satire that shows us in a very sometimes also hurtful way how difficult it also can be to be solidaric, and what solidarity can also mean, and how, from is it like the solidarity that is now the public that describes a public value, or is it the solidarity of a single person? But I would just also be curious on your idea now, just coming to an end. Also, like how, because your film, Andreas, does show it in a very different way. Your film is like a solidaric piece itself. It doesn't necessarily show solidarity, but it is like a solidaric art piece. So I'm just wondering also about your perspective on this difficulty also to portray something like solidarity on screen, and what what it can mean to work with such a with such a broad topic. Is it possible to bring people together in such a way?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a difficult question and task, I think, to figure out how you can enact solidarity through film. I think what I tried to do was to do something that was it had a lot of affect in it without creating this sort of without having this victim situation in it, as I was talking about before, because I feel like often solidarity is enacted through when tried in film through us feeling empathy instead of solidarity, right? So we feel empathy for this one person in a horrible situation, and we should, and that's important to be empathic. But I feel there is a question of maybe are there issues with building solidarity around empathy, right? Because sometimes there will be people who are in a horrible situation and that we should have solidarity with, but maybe we can't feel empathy for them for whatever reason. Maybe we don't like their personality, or we just don't really feel it, or something like this. And I think for that reason, building solidarity around empathy is vulnerable, although it can be effective sometimes. So I think that was also part of the reasoning for me behind not choosing to work with people in this film. Also because, I mean, the question that really quickly arises when you discuss deportation centers and deportation, at least in the Danish debate and also in the UK where I was based when I made this movie, is that people start talking about, or the discourse begins to be about, oh, who are these people? Oh, they are criminals, or they have done this and that. And that is heavily fueled by racist and xenophobic discourse. But sometimes you're also talking about people who have been to prison, who have committed some sort of crime. And if we base solidarity upon empathy, then it will be difficult to say, oh, this person that has been committed of a crime, whatever the crime is, or they shouldn't be deported, or they shouldn't go to prison, because there will be sort of a strong emotional sense of saying, oh, this is a criminal person, they should not be here. So I don't know if it makes sense, but I think that is what would be my answer to like thinking about empathy and solidarity together, and how those two concepts align and sometimes work against each other.
I think it's, if I may add, or like
Absolutely,
immediately respond to that. I think it's really important what you said about the like the relationship between empathy and solidarity, and the idea that sometimes empathy is viewed to be solidarity. And I think like if solidarity is reduced to empathy, then it's like it creates victims that are without agency. And I feel that it's so important not to confuse those two concepts or actions, because we don't want to create victims, because they do have agency, and those people have power, although the structures they live in reduce their agency. But I feel like solidarity is always something that exists in interaction. It's never something that I could do alone. I cannot be a solidary person by myself. I have to be in exchange, I have to be interactive. Solidarity always is in communication and in interaction with a person that has agency. So, and if we are only empathetic, then we create victims ourselves, and this is not what we want. So I feel it's really important to always reflect on this idea of what's only empathy and what is real solidarity. Like, what is real solidarity, but not to confuse those two.
thank you. This was I think from both of you, it was a beautiful answer, and it also for me kind of wraps up now what we have discussed today. And I think it if this was the final words of this talk, I think it cannot get much better. So I if you're okay with it, I think I would say I would love to say thank you to the two of you. I also have to say I learned a lot in this talk, which I am very happy about. And if we all can take that with us as a learning that that empathy and solidarity are both two great concepts, but should not necessarily be mixed. I think this is maybe good, something good to take away also. Yeah, thank you very much, Andreas, Lisa, for joining on this nice Saturday afternoon. There will be a recording of this online available on viennashorts.com. I also would like to thank Polona for the whole technical department, and Maria for programming the industry talks. I'm very happy that this worked out, and I wish you a great festival, great rest of the festival, and hope to see you soon in person as well.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for the invitation, and have a successful festival, Daniel. I think now the weather is nice and the cinemas are open, so there's.
It's true. It's true.
The best now.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, both of you, and thank you for having me.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.